Well, good morning. Thanks for allowing us to be part of your Sunday. Today we're going to take a look at a company that's been around for a very long time, but one that's gone through some interesting and major changes. We'll find out more about it starting right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Upper Peninsula Power Company can trace its roots back to 1854, when the Peninsula Electric Light and Power Company began operating in the Keweenaw Peninsula. After a merger of several companies, it was formally incorporated as Upco 70 years ago in 1947. The company's gone through some major ownership changes in the past 20 years, and that's one of the things we want to talk about this morning with Jim Larson, the person who heads up the company. Jim, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Oh, thanks, Don. It's great to be here.
What, I want to follow through on that thread of Upco and a little bit of its history. First, a little bit about you. Where did life begin for you?
Well, I'm actually originally from upstate New York, almost pretty much in the Adirondack region of New York, so very similar terrain actually to here. I know everybody, when you hear New York, you think of New York City,
right.
but really it was more northern part of New York.
Were you far enough away from Lake Erie to avoid the lake effect snow?
I was. It was cold, but not a snow belt like it is here.
Okay. And you went to Clarkson University?
I did. I've been calling it the Michigan Tech of New York also. Okay. It's at the very northern border of New York, right on the border of Canada. Very cold winters, and engineering school, very good at putting out engineers, and very similar to Michigan
and
Tech.
You got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering.
Mechanical, yes.
But you also went to a Navy power school. What was that about?
Yeah, that's a little unique. So I was out of college. I was hired by General Electric, and they actually sent me through the Navy's program to learn how to become a nuclear operator through their officer program. And so I went down to nuclear power school for 6 months as a civilian, which was fairly unique. And then I learned at a prototype, which is the normal training program, for 6 months. And then instead of going out to sea and being on a submarine, I stayed on the land-based prototype and worked there for the following 10 years. And our mission really was twofold: to train Navy sailors to go out to sea and operate a reactor safely and efficiently. And then also we did testing of new reactors and new improvements to the reactors.
Okay, and how long did you stay in that line of work?
That was about 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting.
And somehow you wound up at Semco here in Michigan. What brought you here?
My wife.
Okay.
All good stories, right? So my wife is actually from Sault Ste. Marie, Canada.
Okay.
And so we met, we got married, and we were looking for a place that was probably closer to both of our families. So Port Huron, Michigan is where I moved to, and it was about halfway between our parents.
Okay. Now you wound up coming here to Upco. Let's talk a little bit about Upco now, because
Sure.
I mentioned some of that history. And it's interesting to me because I remember, there were, in the early days of TV6, Upco was one of our big sponsors.
Right.
They used to sponsor the news. This was back in the days of Ready Kilowatt. I don't know if he's around anymore. And it was also a different era because power companies were advertising to get you to use power. And that's not really something you're supposed to do anymore, is it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not something we're supposed to do. I think actually you're looking, a lot of energy companies are looking at innovative ways to use power. You see electric cars and
Right.
other opportunities. But you're right, from a governance perspective and a regulatory perspective, some of the advertising is limited.
You can advertise for safety, you can
Correct.
advertise
Yeah.
encouraging people to be conservation minded.
Exactly.
But back in those days, they said go out and buy some more refrigerators and washing machines.
It was a little different then, yes.
Use your electric power. Let's talk about the fact that Upco, people think, well, Upco's been here for all these years. But some major changes occurred in the not too distant past, which meant that Upco was really not an Upper Peninsula company, was it?
No, we kind of consider ourselves as you said, I think you said 1954, we're 147? Or 47,
That's
sorry.
the number I used. You may have a better one.
Yeah, and I've seen other numbers because it depends on what event
Right.
you pick. But essentially we're a 150-year-old startup company. The interesting thing at Upco is in 2014, 3 years ago, Upco was sold. It was originally part of the Integris Energy Group, and then it was sold to be independent. And what that meant was establishing a new headquarters here in the UP in Marquette. And we actually brought all the functions that used to be done in Wisconsin into our area. So we actually hired about 50 employees, and this is before my time, so I shouldn't say we, but so we hired 50 employees, and really to do all the back office functions that had been done previously by the parent company. So areas such as accounting, human resources, the customer call center, the care center. We even have our own system operations center here in Michigan now, which is the only one in the UP right now. So it's kind of an exciting time for Upco because there's a lot of new things going on, and it's kind of a new company, but yet has a long history and long roots in the UP.
And you know, right along, of course, Upco had line technicians, whatever the right title is for that job classification, people here to maintain the power lines and provide
Correct.
the service. But it was really not a company based here, and now it is.
Yeah, and that's important, you know, so I'm the CEO of Upco, so, you know, my headquarters is here in Marquette. I live here. I actually live in Negaunee Township is where my home is. So we are locally based, and that's what we want people to understand. And I know, like I say, there's been a lot of change in the last 3 years, and the reality is, even though the sale took place 3 years ago, it's really taken this long to hire employees, put in new computer systems, make the transfer. A lot of things were still being done by the previous company, and actually February of this year was the last task that was being done by the prior company. So we were really independent as of February of this year.
And that's about the time you arrived, March maybe?
April I showed
April,
up, yeah,
okay.
so just, yeah.
Okay, a lot more to find out about. We'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the show after we take this break. Again, this morning we're talking with Jim Larson, the CEO of Upco, Upper Peninsula Power Company. Before we leave that transition, I know there were some issues with billing that kind of irritated some of your customers at one point, and really some of that had to do with this transition, didn't it?
Yeah, no, that's important, Don, and that was probably one of the more significant events in the last 3 years. When they put the new billing system in, the new computer system that really manages all of our finances, but also all the billing and all the customer information, that went live last year in 2016 at the beginning of the year, and there were significant issues, and there was a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one, as I said, you had a lot of new employees, and they did a tremendous job, but the other factor there was the prior company, Integris, was during that transition while we're setting up systems and validating, they were sold to WPS. Okay. So then they were migrating to a new system also, and so it added a lot of different challenges to that process. So when the system went live last year in 2016, there were some errors made to customer bills. And what the errors typically was somebody wouldn't get billed for a certain month, and then the following month they would get basically a double bill. They'd get billed for the prior 2 months. So it wasn't the fact that they were being charged too much or too little in the long scheme. It was more of a timing issue with the way the bills were being handed out.
How many employees does your company have now here in Upper Michigan?
We're up to 170.
Okay. And I know as far as people getting information, you do have a customer portal, I think you call it, but a website that provides a lot of information.
We do, and just to reinforce, a lot of those issues we had with billing were last year. Since the beginning of this year, our system's been fine. It's kind of proven. It'll still take a few years to mature, but the good thing is we're in a point now where we're adding features now and new features that customers can use. So this summer we did roll out our online portal, and it was a more enhanced portal. And I recommend anybody who has questions about their bill or wants to look at history, they can now go online, set up an account, and not only can you pay your bill, but you can actually look at the history. You can actually sign up for budget billing. There's a lot of new features that weren't there previously.
And you can kind of examine your power usage, is that
available
now too?
And that's one of the bigger questions I think we get is somebody might get a new appliance or they put a heater in their garage for a pet, and they may not know how much energy that actually takes. Now with the portal, you'll be able to look and maybe compare it to last year, or look at better history on it.
Let's talk about rates, and I'll kind of give you the layman's view of how I think it works, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But obviously, as a utility, your rates are controlled by the Michigan Public Service Commission, and their approach is that any utility is allowed to cover its reasonable costs and make a reasonable return on their money. Otherwise, you couldn't get investors. Is that kind of how the system works?
That's true. For investor-owned utilities, correct.
Right.
Yes.
So when Michigan Public Service Commission or anyone else looks at Upco, what are they looking at in determining whether or not your rate requests are reasonable or appropriate?
Yeah, no, that's good. So and that's probably a very complicated
Right.
question. So
But
if you
the
if you actually
simple
look at
version.
your electric bill, there's actually many different rates on your electric bill, and you know, of course, the biggest comment I get, it gets confusing, which it is. Most of those rates each have a different regulatory process that we have to follow, and I think we've actually had 2 or 3 press releases this summer about 2 or 3 of the different rates that were changing, and for the better. Actually, we're actually anticipating with several rate changes that are occurring this fall, an overall decrease to people's bills beginning in January. And actually for residential customers, it's about 1.5%, but for larger commercial industrial, it's closer to 10%. So some significant savings. So different components have different regulatory processes. Now the one that gets the most news is a general rate case. And what that is, it sets your distribution rates. And that is a long, lengthy process. It generally takes about a year from when you start to when you finish. And that's really the part where the money that really is recovered by the utility is disputed. And you're right, to get to your question as far as how is that determined, what we do is we'll provide a whole year worth of history, in some cases 5 years, depending on what the component is. And we do the calculations on what the reasonable is. And what we do is we then sit down with interveners. So we file a case. It's a legal case with a judge down in Lansing. There are interveners, other parties to the case, such as the Attorney General's office, and sometimes some major customers are also party to that. And we'll go through and we talk about it, and we'll testify to all the different components in the case. So that's kind of layman's, I don't know if I quite answered your question accurately.
But you have to be reasonable in the money you're spending for whatever you're spending.
Yeah, and whatever's determined not to be reasonable gets excluded, and then after that process, then new rates are set. So that's how it works. It's very transparent. The whole process is really it's managed by the Michigan Public Service Commission. They've been doing this a long time, and they do a great job.
Okay. We'll follow up on that and cover some other questions as well in just a couple of minutes. We'll get back with more on today's Ryan Report after we take one more break. You know, over the course of history, many discoveries and inventions have had a profound effect on life. The controlled use of fire, the invention of the wheel and the printing press, and the development of penicillin are often identified as life-changing and transformational issues. Many others could be added to that list. My question today is, as amazing as it is, does the iPhone or smartphone deserve to be on the list of things that transform the world? Not many years ago, if someone told me I would one day be carrying a single device in my pocket that was a cell phone, a mini computer, my daily calendar, and a camera that shoots pictures and video, I would have said sure, when cars drive themselves. Oh, wait a minute, that's happening too. Before we consider this, I should point out many developments that had a positive impact on life often come with a negative side as well. Obviously, fire is good, but can also be very dangerous. The automobile opened up new worlds of travel for all of us. But last year, 40,000 people lost their lives in auto accidents. We could make similar comparisons for other new inventions that have changed the world. Well, Apple recently announced their latest and greatest iPhones, including not just one, but 2 or 3 new models. The basic model is the iPhone 8, which is here to replace the 7, which does bring to mind the fact that for an innovative company, they could have come up with a more creative naming strategy. Imagine if General Motors had taken the same approach and we had the Chevy 1, the Chevy 2, the Chevy 3, and well, you get the idea. Anyway, I digress. Among the new models is what must be the Cadillac of the phones because it's called the X. Or is that just 10 in Roman numerals? And the price tag is $1,000 for a telephone. I don't think my first car cost much more than that. So has the phone transformed life as we know it? I think it has. And like the rest of the innovations described earlier, it cuts both ways. With the cell phone, you never have to be out of touch. Of course, sometimes you'd like to be out of touch. It can provide information you need at any time, but it can also cause us to spend a lot of time checking out things we really don't need to know. How many times have you seen people, especially young people, walking around like zombies staring at their cell phone? Then, of course, there's texting, which can really be an efficient way to exchange messages. But for some, it's replaced all direct communication. We appear to be heading for a world where there's no more face-to-face or even voice-to-voice contact. It's all done with words written on a small screen. So, wait a minute. Oh, sorry, I have to go. I have an important text message I need to answer. I'll be back in a minute. It's time for us to wrap it up for another week. The Today Show is almost set to roll. Keep in mind you can watch back episodes of this show anytime at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be available starting at about noon tomorrow. Thanks to Jim Larson for joining us this morning to help us understand some of the major changes that have occurred at a long-time Upper Michigan company. It's an interesting story. And thank you for being here. Hope we can count on seeing you again next Sunday morning.